மேலெல்லாம் இது yeah. So I think that to understand even science as um, a humanistic project, that a human endeavor, one has to go beyond science and understands, ask questions, for example, about its um, historical origins and uh, why are we thinking about nature in the following way? Is it, that is neither obvious nor self-evident that we think about it that way. So, so I think that what is curious is the link between an emphasis on science and technological education on the one hand, and in the academic institution, and on the other hand, the also the kind of tendency in the Indian approach to also equally emphasize tradition, culture, Indian culture, customs, and caste practices, and so on. So, what is the link between the two? I think it is interesting that India still kind of emphasizes the traditional cultural aspect, that it has not simply given up all of that and just um, went on to completely embrace science as if it's the only thing that is important. I think interesting that it is trying to do both, but I think there is a question to be asked about how they're linked, how one person who is trying to be good at both, be thoughtful about both science and cultural practices, and not simply mechanically following that. How, if one is trying to approach that in a thoughtful manner, how does one go about that? How do both those ways of inquiry or ways of looking at the world coexist in one individual? I don't know.
Right.
So I think that one approach that I've seen that is current in America, but also I know that probably Indian universities are also, I'm guessing, are hopping on this kind of approach, is where where students get education in the STEM fields. They become engineers or computer science professionals, or even doctors and nurses going into the science field, lucrative science fields. But then they take courses in ethics as this kind of little
Yeah.
uh, trying to deal with these questions of value. But it appears to me that it's almost as an afterthought. It is seen as some kind of this quick course that you can take that will make you better engineers or better doctors, or so it's seen as some kind of it fixes all the rough edges there might be, and then you can then send them out into the world and they will do good things in the world. All right. So ethics is seen as this kind of, this kind of garnishing on top, kind of like coriander leaves or something after you're done with this, rasam. So you put this on top to give some flavor, but it is not an essential ingredient. Yeah. Uh,
Right.
so I think that so the question is whether there is a ground up approach where you don't see the humanistic disciplines, that is philosophy, literature, history, religion, and spirituality, and things like that, that you don't see that as simply a kind of an external nicety that one needs to kind of have to be a better human being, but rather it is essential um, uh, for creating kind of holistic, well-rounded scientific professionals on the one hand, but also to understand science itself in a more deeper manner. So anyway, so I think those are important questions to ask.
Right. No, so are they like opposing, or do they complement each other? That is the question, So, do they? Is there points where they meet, or is there a big overlapping space for for the technological advances and the cultural
Mhm.
narratives? Are they is there a point of I mean, do they kind of complement each other? Do they support each other's theory? Do they support each other's existence in a way, or are they exclusive in its? Uh, so is there an added attempt that people have to do to kind of embrace it, or if you take one, the other comes along on its own?
Yeah.
These are the points, because if you're taking ethics as a separate topic, that means if the science alone in its existence doesn't have ethics, or technology alone or engineering alone doesn't ethically ground you, so you got to ground yourself separately with an ethical class.
Mhm.
So somehow the humanistic aspect of science is being set aside when you're studying science. So,
Mhm. So
uh,
it's like someone who goes and does gambling in the daytime and then goes to the temple in the nighttime, right? It's like that. Studying ethics on top. So I think that the problem is that um, so to answer your question, I think if you look at the history of science, technology, history of medicine, and so on, the there's nothing denying the fact that there are multiple levels of connection. In fact, science itself grows out of subjects like philosophy, and even has connections to literature and religion. So for example, if you read the writings of Galileo and his essays, he's on the one hand grappling with religious knowledge. On the other hand, he's talking about how to think about the movement of the stars and sun and Earth and so on. And he thinks that they're related ideas, and so there is some sort of historically, if you ask a historian of science, there's some sort of continuity between religious thinking, um, thinking about um, uh, um, the human being's place in the world, all those kinds of ethical reflections, and the emergence of the new field of inquiry, which later becomes science. I think the part of what we see when we look at the history of science is that as beginning 18th, 19th century in Europe, as through industrial revolution and scientific and discoveries in various fields in science, science becomes um, more and more advanced. That means it kind of becomes more specialized, and therefore it appears to have broken off from its origins in subjects like philosophy and religious studies. But if you dig deeper, you'll see that they have certain kinds of shared assumptions. For example, I would say how Western science conceptualizes nature. For example, nature can be approached in a mechanical manner, that it can be understood as a series of cause and effects, that can be that natural processes themselves don't have some kind of um, inner purpose, inner intent. That that is a that is a particular kind of understanding of nature that grows out of um, Protestant Christianity, for example. In earlier Christianity, there's a different understanding of nature, or even pre-Christian days. If you look at Greek science, they think that nature has an inherent purpose. That's why they were not comfortable with understanding nature in this kind of um, mechanistic cause and effect manner. And I think that there's some similarities between Greek science and ancient Indian science in that manner. So modern Western science actually borrows from Christianity this understanding of nature um, as simply a kind of um, purpose, that it lacks an inherent purpose or meaning. Now, that is, natural processes lack an inherent purpose and meaning, that they're simply these kinds of mechanical cause and effect that act in sort of ways that you can map onto mathematical models without asking the question, why are they acting in this way? So that question of purpose or meaning was not present in a lot of Christian religious thought. That Western science, especially figures like Galileo, borrow from Christian thought, but they take it in different ways, which at some point conflicts with some of Christian teachings. That's why Galileo was famously put into house arrest and so on. So there are points of tension. That's not to deny that. But my point here is that if you look at the history of science, you can trace a lot of these questions back to earlier reflections on nature and the human being's place in the wide cosmos. Similarly, if you look at the history of technology, those are the impulse or the kind of the motivation behind various technological developments have to do with various economical, social, and political questions and demands that people had in during the Industrial Revolution in Europe, whether they are questions of whether they have to do with questions of economic growth or the colonization of Europe by colonization of various parts of the world by Europe. So they have sometimes problematic motives behind them. So not all technological developments are, for example, good, or not every kind of efficiency in technology is always necessarily good. It could be good, but it's not necessarily good or for the better, or technology doesn't equate progress,
Yeah.
for instance.
Yeah. So now, what is good in technology? I mean, what constitutes good? I mean, my. I mean, if you see the growth in technology should be aligned to serving the needs of kind of experiencing or enhancing the human experience uh,
Mhm.
per se, but then it somehow has over the years evolved in a way that it takes you away from the human experience into a
Right.
space which is completely alien
Absolutely.
to us. Maybe that is exciting. Maybe that is what is driving this, or maybe it's just sold for capitalistic gains, uh, which is very interesting how it has moved this direction. Now to bring it back and have some grounding, there is a separate ethical lesson,
Right.
but it really doesn't serve its purpose because the the force with which it's being driven is maybe like you're saying the economical, the political, the socio model around which we are building. The competition for the growth of technology is not in alignment to the growth, I mean, to the human needs and requirements, but the
Absolutely.
technology has become a separate existence of its own and a demand of
Absolutely.
its own, which is
Absolutely.
completely alien
Yeah.
to, I mean, which is completely kind of separated from the human
Right.
existence itself.
I mean,
So,
this is absolutely right. This is exactly what is expressed when people are worried about the AI, the emerging AI. What if it kills all humans, right? Or what if it takes over all our most kind of uh, projects that make us human in the first place, right? Like, for example, care of patients or care of the elderly.
mm,
Can we replace that with robots, right?
right,
Uh, do we now, replace uh, the education of our youth, like the fact
right,
that they have to read and learn and write? Can we simply outsource that to ChatGPT, right? So you can, but it leaves aside the question: what about the child? What kind of life are they living?
right,
Um,
right,
so, but that's precisely the question. When we ask ourselves what are our needs, that is a question that is not entirely answered through technological and scientific means. That's a humanistic question. That's a difficult question. That's a question that cannot be answered once and for all. That question has to be raised again and again in different cultural and historical contexts. And that question might be, for example, that question might be answered differently in America, given its own history, than India with its vastly different history and cultural origins. That question about what do we need? But the problem today is that we are not even asking that question, let alone answer that. So
Yeah,
we are
that's it.
just
Yeah.
pretending as if that question is already answered. The answer typically is assumed to be what we need is better things. Better here means efficient things. Technology promises efficiency.
So
So
efficiency, shorter time, quicker results.
quicker results. Yeah.
Yeah, quicker
and
results.
and and, and, and quicker results, and there is also an understanding of efficiency where we don't simply fulfill our needs because one, we don't even necessarily understand clearly what those needs are, but we are actually inventing new needs or wants. No one has a need for
Hmm.
iPhone 20 right now, uh, right? But then they will create that phone and say, you need this, you need this phone with this camera technology, and then you say, okay, there you go, $2,000, please give me that phone. So we are falling for this kind of narrative of progress and efficiency. Again, that doesn't mean that we should not desire progress and efficiency, but is that our only need or only primary need? That we need to ask that. How is that value of progress and efficiency contributing to us growing together as human beings, living healthy and fulfilling lives? I don't know. That's a question that needs to be asked.
Right.
Maybe it does. Maybe efficiency means fulfilling lives, but I'm highly dubious of that, given the vast amount of reports we see everywhere across different nations about, especially when we look at younger generation who are now not having real face-to-face interaction with people, not to the extent that they had in previous generations, not having face-to-face actual tangible relationships with people, uh, but are consumed with phone and social media all the time. They go to a museum, for example, and they don't look at the actually what is at the museum, but they take a picture of it and look at it through the phone. And so and this kind of abstraction from reality, that's what's going on, that we are not actually engaging with reality as directly, but we are sort of almost this meta level relationship to reality where we don't simply engage with it, but we are have this kind of screen through which we engage, literally a screen through which we engage this reality. And that's okay again in small doses, but if that becomes our primary way of relating to the world, that has implications for mental health. For example, this kind of mental health crisis that people are talking about, where there are higher rates of depression, anxiety, and things like that, or social ineptitude, but also physical health. That kids are perhaps no longer going and playing physical sports, for instance, and they're just kind of cued into their phones all the time. So the idea here is that one, we are not even posing the question, but technology, question of our values and needs. But technology has its own values and needs. The value here being progress, efficiency, making life better, connecting the world. Those kinds of language that companies like Meta, Facebook, etc., Google, they use this kind of language, connecting the world. They use kind of value laden phrases and language to describe what they're doing. Please note, and so that they're not simply talking about gigabytes and stuff. They're using very humanistic, value oriented language when they talk about technology. And secondly, to your other point, I think that technology has become its own thing. I think that there's a perception of technology as a tool, that technology itself does not have a value. We have the value, and therefore technology is a tool that enables us to realize our values, actualize our values. That's the ideal relationship between humans and technology. We
Mm,
bring the value, you bring the efficiency,
mm,
and then I use you because you're a tool. I use you to further my value, so everyone is happy,
mm.
right? So, but what has actually happened in reality is that we are not bringing the value, so it's not clear to us what those
No,
values are.
that is it. That is
Right.
it. You know, so
And two, technology I don't think is a tool anymore. I think especially in the contemporary information technology, I think we've become the tools,
right.
and technology has become an independent entity, having its own claim on us, right? So, for example, if we have 5 or 10 minutes of free time, a significant percentage of people who own smartphones across the world, the first thing that they do is take out their phone. Technically, you might assume and take out the phone and stare at things that, again, you don't have a need to do that. You really don't have a need to do that. You didn't do that 20 years ago if you are older than 20 years, and if you
Mm,
have memory of your life before that. You didn't do it, right? And so you don't have a need to do that. But and you might tell yourself, I bought this piece of phone, it's mine, it's a tool, I have a right to engage, take it out whenever I want.
yeah.
That's all kind of legalist language. I have a right on it, I've bought it, and so on. Fine. But if you really look at what's going on, the technology is controlling you. Like I ask my students a lot of the times, how many of you go to the last thing that you see before going to bed is your phone, and the first thing you see after you wake up is your phone, not anyone else, not the wall, not even the TV, but your phone, right? And so it's very interesting that uh, to ask the question, who owns who here? Uh, do we own technology or technology owns us? So if technology is no longer a tool, and especially this kind of modern information technology and electronic technology is no longer a tool, then it has its own values. We are not simply the origin of values. That it kind of creates a world for us, or at least arranges things in the world such the that it pushes us to live a certain kind of life, and that's the value question. It doesn't mean that we are simply pawns to it. Maybe we can resist it. Maybe we can say no, 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 we reject you, but we don't know any longer how to do that. And increasingly any longer how to do that, such that we are simply we don't have the willpower to
Right.
do
And
that.
we also don't know where to draw the lines. Even if we don't do it to a large extent, we feel this is a part of life. This has to be embraced. This is how
Right,
we do it.
right.
And
It's
this becomes the
inevitable.
new normal. This
Right,
becomes the new
right,
normal. So, what is
right.
life without it? Science, being a human endeavor, has moved away in
Hmm.
ways that
Right,
it's no more a project that we had as human beings, but it has a separate existence of its own.
right.
Although even now it is being manufactured, it's being programmed by us. Still, they're not programming on by themselves. But
Yeah.
then uh, for the masses, I think it has a separate entity with its own value systems, with its own uh, applications, which so we are becoming tools to use the applications and make that uh, the center of our existence in a way
Mhm.
which where you feel that this is a necessity for us to have, without which you become inefficient. Yeah.
Inefficient. So basically, we are being used as a tool while we are thinking that we are using something else as a tool.
Right.
So the essentially what's happened is that human beings being used as a tool is being concealed through the arrogance that we have, that we are the users of the tool. That arrogance kind of uh, conceals the real fact that we are no longer in control, right? And so um, I think that, I mean, it's almost as if this kind of this, as you said, the science as a human endeavor has gotten away to such an extent that it is the technology now has become its own entity that is defining the human, and human is no longer define the technology. From a certain point of view, I sometimes think that the if you look at the history of science and technology, it's almost as if um, it's almost as if you know a kind of a dark impulse behind Western science and technology is to, it's almost as if we needed to relinquish or outsource the question, the the onerous and burdensome question of what it means to human. I don't want to ask that question anymore. A question that human beings have always asked in across different cultures and different historical epochs. Uh, we no longer want to ask that question. We want to relinquish the
Yeah.
burden of asking that question,
Yeah.
and we want to sort of put it on something else. But I sometimes wonder whether that's ultimately on the one hand, it's a very cynical undertaking. Therefore, a very kind of it's almost there's a kind of um, is there? I ask. I don't want to say this in the assertive, but I want to ask the question: is there a kind of a self-hatred that is driving a lot of the scientific and technological
Mm,
progress,
mm,
because it wants to relinquish the question, relinquish the task of being human,
right.
and wants to put that task on some other entity, and it's almost as if in older times we people ask that question to God, to theology and religion to answer that question, that
Ah,
what it means to be human. Science takes over that question and says we don't need God to answer that question. We can answer that
right.
ourselves.
Right.
But in fact, what it has done is outsource that question to AI or these kinds of um, non-human or
Bigger
transhuman
database.
entities.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's almost like with science, man tried to play God, but gave up on that, gave up on that, and said someone else do it. We cannot do it anymore.
But
We
there
cannot
is
answer that.
interesting perspectives here. One is, I mean, interesting challenges here. One is that of uh, uh, a new normal that has stepped in, that has made itself, announced itself very loud. But at the same time, there is such a big difference between now when you talk about the effect of cultural aspects into the modern life, or a historical perspective, or the historical understanding of how life was and how people treated each other, to how engagements were, to how we engage with nature, to what is right now. There is such a huge leap in understanding, huge leap with uh, uh, with engagement itself. This will be reflected in the corporates. This will be reflected in universities. So the challenge is now, like in a university, would be a professor would not be able to connect in so many ways to the students, because the life that he has led is so alien to the students' life that they're leading right now. So the
Right.
leap of the gap, the generational gap, is so huge. This is it needs a special training now
Yeah.
for professors to kind of realign. Yeah.
Right. I think what is called for now is to acknowledge that despite that leap, despite that huge generational change, which we cannot deny, there is also something that has actually been constant throughout, whether in a generation or two ago and the current generation. And there's at least two things. One that is a more conceptual question of how, for example, what we've been talking about, how science needs the humanistic studies. But on the other hand, even humanistic studies benefits from scientific, analytic way of thinking. So I think that that link has always been there, no matter what generation.
Mm.
And I think that what has happened in the modern university is a certain kind of fragmentation of knowledge, where, I mean, if you can think of the whole edifice of knowledge as this big, vast tree, the modern university offers to the student one twig from one particular branch of the tree, uh, whereas the goal of the education should be to at least provide a good glimpse for the student of how the tree itself is composed, how where its roots are, how different subjects are intertwined at different levels before they branch off into various specialties or particular applications in the real world. Those are real. They do branch off at various stages, but the branching off is a historically new phenomenon. But the intertwining is much more ancient, and that needs to be
Yeah.
understood.
Yeah.
I think that there has to be a greater interaction and and exposure um, um, to the intertwining between scientific thought and humanistic thought, the human sciences and the natural sciences, if you want to put it that way. And when we understand that deep history and deep conceptual link between the two kinds of sciences, what we note again is not simply that there are points of contact or points where one informs the other. That happens, but there's also points of challenge, points of friction, where we understand, where from a humanistic point of view, for example, which asks the question of human needs and what is essential for us to live a kind of a flourishing life as human beings. When we ask that question, we might even uh, be skeptical about various kinds of claims about scientific or technological progress, and vice versa. So I think that there is a healthy dose of skepticism that students um, will will kind of understand and apply by understanding the link between the different levels of link between the human sciences and the natural sciences. So it's not simply that they will enlighten and glorify each other,
Right.
but they might also question and
Yeah.
complicate their relationship.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I think that there's something specific. The second point here is that there's something specific about uh, this very friction or relationship between human and natural sciences in the Indian context, because the Indian history and religion and spirituality and ethics is slightly, to put it mildly, slightly different from the Western context. And that's why we go back to the original discussion on Indian tradition and culture. I think that what is its place in the modern university? Where is that something that the scientific student does in their private, when in their home, in their family setup, that has no place in their university education, in their pursuit of scientific and technological knowledge? Are they completely kind of two different things?
Mm.
And so I think that's a really, I would even say, more unexplored question. If we look at the link between human and natural sciences in the Indian context, I think that very question in the
Yeah.
Western or European context there's a lot of written on that, and I know there's scholars in India who are also worried about that question in the Indian context, but I think it's still a emerging field, and there's a lot to be said about that. And I think just the kind of easy solution that a lot of universities today have adopted is to kind of throw in a couple of ethics courses as this kind of superficial, surface level inquiry, that somehow the belief is that will empower students to go on and become uh, uh, good engineers or doctors in the real world, uh, while leaving again the deeper questions of the intertwined, how the human and natural sciences are intertwined, and also how a person from an Indian background with Indian traditional and cultural and customary thought processes, how they will take up science. What does science mean for them? What does technology mean for them? I think that there is a lot to be said and explored in that arena. Yeah.
So it's very interesting. So I think, I mean, if you even if you really leave the religion aside, uh, the practical application of technology into human life and understanding and growth has to be clearly established in many ways. Like, for example, there is a telescope, you're looking out in the sky, you're looking at the stars, you're looking at the galaxies. But what does it mean to me at this point in time? How does it
Mhm.
translate to me at this point in time? What does it mean
Mhm.
for me personally with the things that I'm
Right.
going through? At the same time, what does it mean for humans to even observe this? And how do we kind of digest these facts that we are observing, and how do we make sense out of this and integrate this into our lives, with so
Right.
that part is always a missing link. You look into the microscopes,
Yeah.
you see small cells, but then what does it really mean? How does it translate into your life? So constantly that
Yeah.
discussion and that dialogue has kind of not percolated into the masses. Maybe I think the selected few have really spoken about it, and uh, maybe the spiritual angle of technology can really open up many doors of discussion and different understanding of
Yeah.
and perspective of technology in the modern life. Um,
I also want to add here that there is, of course, in the Indian tradition, uh, India has its own science, and that is also ancient. So that only complicates the question that I was the second point that I was talking about earlier, right? And especially in medicine with the Ayurveda and so on, I think that there is a rich tradition of Indian scientific approaches. How does that sit with the Western medicine, for example? And I mean, there's a lot of people who will dismiss Indian medicine, for example, as just pseudoscience and so on. But anyway, but there's also people who might judge the Western medicine as not really promoting the health of the body, but just trying to cure symptoms or certain kinds of uh, tangible
yeah,
ailments that can be detected, right? So how does a Indian practitioner of science do science in our day and age? I think that's a really important, difficult, complicated question, which at the very least should be recognized as an important question to pose, let alone, you know, giving any kind of thoughtful answer to that
right.
question. So, I mean, there's this kind of, I was reading this essay by Tagore, um, um, called Nationalism, and he describes the nation as the kind of Western nation state political um, ideal that through Western colonialism has been prescribed to a lot of nations, including India, as the political ideal that everyone um, has to adapt to. I mean, there's a lot of interesting points he says about that, about what nationalism means in the contemporary age. But one of the interesting points that he says about the nation, or this Western idea of the nation, is that it is driven by the goal of efficiency uh, in the scientific, technological, mechanical sense of the term. It's the value of efficiency.
Mm.
So the Western nation is fueled by the idea of progress, which itself is fueled by Western science and technology. And he goes on to talk about the kind of the effect of adopting this kind of national project, this nationalistic project, uh, whether in the West or in India or other nations. And he describes that over time, these other cultures become kind of monstrous. He uses the term monster, uh, monstrous because of its overemphasis on certain areas. It's a monster is something that is disfigured, that has no concern for a holistic development of its entire organism. A monster can have a overinflated nose, or it could be a bulky eyes or bulging eyes, for example, at the expense of other parts of its body, right? In the same way, the modern nation is monstrous. Tagore says very beautifully and prophetically, because of its overemphasis on this goal of efficiency, and the ordering of human talent and the generations to succumb to this ideal of efficiency at the expense of other needs that they might have as human beings. In fact, we're not even asking the questions of those needs. We are becoming, according to Tagore, monstrous in this way, um, with this kind of overinflated values on the one hand, at the expense of ignoring very important, very even at some level, even existential questions about who we are as human beings. Do we will we even exist from as human beings on this earth, given all the catastrophes of climate change, a few decades from now? We are even failing to ask that question in any kind of coherent, sustained manner. So anyway, so I think that image of the monstrosity of the modern nation is very interesting to think about in this
No,
context.
I think it has its roots in the so-called development without keeping in check the purpose of its existence in the first place.
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
it was created on the first place,
yeah,
not just
yeah.
for some economic or a socio-political rat race of some kind, just to prove that we are more advanced than you are.
Mm,
But
mhm.
instead, if it's adding value to the existence itself. So I think the monstrous is so beautifully put, can become monstrous. So
Yeah.
the
I mean, I would
potential
say,
of becoming monstrous exists when it goes away you know uh, from aligning with the human needs and the nature's needs.
mhm.
So I mean, which might be the same. So if it's away from that, there is an element of it going off in many ways. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in terms of an example of development without asking a holistic question about what our needs are and how it is contributing to the health of the whole unit, I would offer, you know, as examples of this, uh, most modern cities across the world. Cities are advertised as these kinds of places of development, uh, instances of modern progress and technology and all this stuff. But if you take any city in India with the chaos of traffic and pollution, and the kind of stress and anxiety it brings upon people living in the city, but also that that juxtaposition of rich millionaires and billionaires and homeless people and slums within those city borders, and it's not just in India, across the world. Whether you see we talk about Brazil or American cities, San Francisco, I mean even Seattle, there's a lot of homelessness, but there's also Amazon headquarters, within 2 miles of each other. How do these two things coexist? That's a version of this monster, an overemphasis on the one and an ignoring of the other. Uh, and 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 uh, um, uh, how do these things go together? How are they part of uh, a single organism, if that organism is a city, right? I think that is not even posed as a serious question in the average um, educated mind. I think that's part of the issue here when we talk about education. I think the point of the education should be to try and um prepare the young generation to be holistic thinkers, not monstrous things, if I can put it that way, not one trick ponies, but to ask how scientific knowledge are related to humanistic values. How do they go together? Uh, how and that will only, I don't think that would compromise um, one's efficiency as a scientific thinker, but only will enrich it in the long run.
Mm. Mm. So yeah, so sustainability is a new concept altogether. You know, there is a so it, any idea which is not sustainable is not a good idea, sure. So I think there are a lot of
Right.
ideas out there
Absolutely.
which is monstrous in
I
its
and I think
existence.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think that there is an interesting link between this holistic approach and sustainability.
right,
Right. I don't think sustainability is simply about recycling.
right,
Right. It's not simply about doing the right things. Right. It's also about being the right kind of way. Uh,
right,
Becoming this kind of holistic, thoughtful uh, individual. We might still mess up the planet, but at least we give ourselves a chance, right?
right,
I think that we cannot simply just live in this monstrous manner on the one side, but then just do recycling between 8 and 8:15 in the morning.
okay,
That's not going to solve it. That's another version of gambling and going to the temple. That's another version of just doing technology blindly and throwing in an ethics class at the end, right? And that's not sustainable,
mm,
right? That's not sustainable as a practice. Yeah, can end it there.